Hi everyone, Stepan here. It's Thursday, so welcome to another Thursday endgame video, endgame lesson. Today I'm going to go over an extremely important defensive technique in Rook and Pawn endgames, which every player should know. It's just as important as the Lucina position, as the Philidor position, the Ventura position, and all the other theoretical Rook endgame drawing or winning techniques. It's called the Kling and Horwitz or K and H Rook endgame. It's an endgame study published in 1851 by two players and theoreticians who contributed a lot to endgame studies, actually. Okay, and it's this position here or something similar. This position will depend on who it is to play. White to play will win this position, black to play will amazingly draw this position, even though if you're familiar with the Lucina or the Philidor or other simple Rook endgames, when the white king is in front of the pawn and the black king is not on the 8th rank in front of the pawn, it's much harder to draw. We will consider this position on all the files, except for the Rook files. Well, that's an automatic draw. But we will see what happens on knight files, on bishop files, and on king and queen files. And also we will see what happens depending on whether the black king is on the long side or on the short side. Okay, before I get into that, if you would like to join my 100-day endgame studies or my 100-day endgame challenge, you want to support me, you're welcome to check out the link in the description below. I'm going over endgames from 8 books. I'm studying from 8 different books and going through all the theoretical endgames in 100 days and creating a chapter for everything I've learned. So for each day you will find several chapters in the study, and I'm also making a corresponding video on Patreon, which you can access there. So if you would like to check out the link in the description below and on Patreon, leave your comment below the video and I will add you to the study. Okay, let's get into the Kling and Horwitz defensive technique. Okay, the first thing we have to note, if it's white to move, white wins fairly easily. How does white win? White plays king to c7, and now whatever black does, it's impossible to stop the king from coming to d7 and from the pawn advancing to d6. Now, how does that happen in practice? Let's say rook to c1, which is probably the most resistant move. King to d7, now you go rook d1, trying to win the pawn. And now d6, and there is no way to stop the pawn from promoting. It requires a bit of technique from white, but it's fairly simple. Let's say king to f6, rook to c8, and what you want to do is get your king from c7 to d8. So let's say king to f7, king to c7, and now if the rook doesn't move, you advance the pawn. If the rook checks you, then you go to d8, and next turn you will bring the pawn closer, and now it's fairly easy. Now you just move towards the rook. Eventually you're going to queen and be a rook up, so d8 equals queen. Rook takes queen, and rook takes rook, and white wins easily. Now, that's if it's white to play. If it's black to play, black has the Kling and Horwitz defensive technique at his disposal. And now white doesn't win the game in this position. I'm going to show you the differences. So the ideas in the Kling and Horwitz are using the rook to give checks along the files if the king should move. Okay, to give horizontal checks if the king should move. So you want to get your rook to a1. Okay, so that's the main move and the only drawing move here. And the idea behind this move is if the king advances to c7, you check it away. So let's say king to c7, this is the easiest move to refute and the easiest position to draw in, and it's the most logical move for white. So what white is trying to do, he's trying to play the move d6, same as in the position before. The difference is now that the rook is not on d1, the rook is on a1. So the difference is we are able to check the king from the side on a7. If we make a mistake and check the king on c1, then the king will advance to d7, and of course, again, we have reached the same position. But after rook to a1, king to c7, when we check the king on a7, there is no way for white to make progress unless he attacks your rook. So what we are trying to do is draw the king out towards the A file, towards our rook. And once he does that, we now advance our king to E7. And this is a mutual attack on rooks. Of course, if white takes your rook, then you take his rook and it's a draw. What else can white do? Well, if he advances the pawn, then you take the rook. If he moves the king away, then you just repeat the position. Okay, so if he moves the rook away, you just repeat the position. So this is what happens on king to c7, and this is the most resistant move. The next idea is, if the white rook moves, then you bring your rook back behind the pawn on d5 to make the king unable to move to d7. So in this position, let's say the rook goes to b8. What white is trying to do now, white wants to go king d7, d6, white wins. In this position, we continue with the rook to d1. This is the second part of the Kling-Horwitz defensive technique, and this is the incredible part. There is no way for white to make progress. Again, returning the rook behind the pawn so that it only has one defender, so that if the king should wander out to c7 or d7, then it's a draw. So let's try king to c6, which again seems to be the most resistant move. If you make a mistake and check, then of course the king will go to d7 and white will win. So rook c1, king d7, followed up by d6, and again a winning position. But now, if you are familiar with the Philidor position, the Philidor position is when our king, the defender's king, has reached the 8th rank behind the pawn, then the pawn is unable to advance to the 6th rank because our rook can just check from the sides, check from behind, from c1, from e1, and it's a draw. So in this position, black plays the remarkable king to e7. And now if d6 is played, then our king goes back and we have a Philidor, so it's easily drawing. If the most resistant move, rook to b7, then we play king to d8, and now it's a draw. This is a very well-known position, which if you are unfamiliar with, check out the video on the Philidor position. So let's say white tries to go king to d6, threatening mate, and now we go to the short side, which is, well, slightly more precise. You could draw with king to e8, but king to c8 is slightly more precise, simply threatening the rook and taking away its space. So let's say rook to f7, and now we simply wait. We wait, let's say rook to d3, and there is nothing white can do. White cannot make progress here. If he checks us, we go here. If the king then moves forward, then we take the pawn. So again, the position is repeated. So let's go back. After rook to a1, there is one move in the Kling and Horwitz that's sort of poisonous and which you have to be careful of. And that's the move rook to c8. After rook to c8, we go for the same thing. This move tries to shield the white king away from the checks. Now, again, we do the same thing. We go rook to d1. And of course, if we make a mistake and check the king from the side, we lose. So let's say in this position, we get tempted to play rook to a6 check. In this position, of course, the same idea that worked after we had attempted to check the king when the king was on c7 doesn't work, because in this position, simply king to d7 advances the king forward, and after rook to a7, rook to c7, shielding the king, and this is now just an easy win. There is nothing black can do. Okay, we move away, the pawn advances, and it's over. So after rook to c8, we go rook to d1 behind the pawn, again stopping the king from moving forward to d7. That's the crucial thing. Whenever we have the starting position and we move our rook away to prepare these checks, if the king advances trying to reach d7 and the rook moves, we just go back behind the pawn. And now how can white continue? Let's say in this position, rook check happens, rook to c7 check. Okay, this is probably the most resistant for white, or the most precise for white. Well, we now try to reach the Philidor again. Okay, if we go king to d8, king to e8 in this position, there is again no way for white to make progress. If he checks us, we go to d8, and now as soon as the king moves away, we keep checking it. When the pawn advances, we have the Philidor. So let's say rook to h7. We now go rook to d2, again waiting. There is no way for white to make progress. If the king moves away to c7, then we take the pawn. So let's say king to e6, but now we check. Rook to e2 check, king to d6, we go back. And as soon as the king moves out, we check it away. Okay, let's look at some other options for white. Let's say white tries to be stubborn and plays rook to d7 check immediately. After rook to d7, we simply go king to e8. And again, once we reach the 8th rank, it's a draw. It's a draw. If you can reach the 8th rank, then you will be able to transpose to the Philidor or similar positions. So let's say rook to e7 check. Again, king to d8. We just want to be in front of the pawn on the 8th rank, because then there is no way for the white king to enter our position, and if the white king wanders off to c6 or e6, then we check it away. Okay, so let's say rook to h7, rook to a6, we check, king to c5, we go back, and that's it. If we go back and the pawn advances to d6, then we know what to do, then it's a Philidor position, a well-known draw. Okay, so now let's look at this position with the black king on the short side. So at this point, the black king is on the long side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If we transfer the king to b7, then it will be on the short side. So what happens here? Okay, in this position, white cannot win. Why? Because let's say rook to g1, black does the same thing, preparing to check from the sides. Let's say rook to f8, rook to g6, king to d7. Rook to g7, and the white king cannot approach the rook. That is the main difference. If king e6, rook g6. If king d7, we repeat. If king e6, rook g6. If the king advances towards our rook, then rook to d6, and we simply pick up the pawn. There is no way to stop that. So if the king is on the short side, our king, that's much better for us. You want to have your king on the short side, you want to have your rook on the long side. So coming back to the original position, this would be the least drawable, if that's a word, scenario for black, because your king is on the long side, your rook has to go to the short side, so it doesn't have that much room to check. So let's try to look at the main move again. So king to c7, the idea was rook to a7 check, and if king to b6, then the remarkable king to e7 is a draw, because if he takes your rook, you take his rook, and the position is now a draw. Okay, so now let's look at what happens on bishop files if the king is on the long side, and if the short side and the long side. So in this position, if our king is on the long side, meaning our rook has to take the short side, then we cannot stop white from winning, even if it's our move. Let's say we go rook to a1. In this position, simply king to b7, and of course we don't have rook to a7 check. Therefore, it's an easy win for white. So let's say rook to b1, king to c7, and of course now the pawn advances to c6. So if our rook, when the pawn is on the bishop file, if our rook has to take the short side, then it's an easy win for white. If our rook can take the long side, then there is no way for white to win. Rook a1, and we do the same thing. White has to repeat. Rook a6 check, king e5, king g7, and again we have the same idea. We want to reach the 8th rank. Rook b7 check, king f8, easy draw. Okay, on the D and the E files, so the original position we looked at was on the D file. The same thing happens on the E file. Our rook goes to a1. His rook has to do something, and our rook to e1, we go back. If our rook to a1, if our rook goes to a1 and the king advances forward, then we just check, and there is no way to make progress. If he goes here, we check. Here, well, in this position, the king just advances forward, and there is no way to defend. If here, of course, we can even win this game. Okay, and now on the knight files, regardless of which file we are talking about, white wins easily, because there is no way for us to get to the other side of the board and check, of course, because we have no room. So we have to do something stupid. So let's say rook to e1, king to g7, rook to g1, g6, and we know that this is an easy win. Okay, so on the D and the E files, the Kling and Horwitz technique is applicable. Okay, and you can draw if it's black to move. So remember, if the pawn is on the 5th rank, the king is in front of it, our king is not on the 8th rank, we cannot defend as if it were a Philidor or trying to reach the Philidor. We have to be more precise, and the way to be more precise is to prepare checks from the side horizontally with the rook. On knight files, white always wins because we don't have enough room to get here. On bishop files, if your rook cannot occupy the long side, then white wins. If your rook can occupy the long side, then it's a draw. Okay, so remember this position. When you have a rook and pawn endgame, try to reduce it to known elements. Known elements in this case will be a rook and a pawn for the winning side or for the attacking side, and the rook and king for the defending side. Remember that when the pawn is on the 5th rank, your king is not ideally placed on the 8th rank to defend, to reach a Philidor. Then the Kling and Horwitz technique is the way to try and draw. I hope this helps. Again, if you want to have a detailed look into my 100-day endgame challenge, follow the link in the description below. I hope this was useful. Please let me know what you think and stay tuned for more chess. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.